see Naomi's plan to find rest for Ruth. Naomi has a plan to find rest for Ruth. This is a different Naomi, by the way, than we see in the beginning of the book. We're looking at a woman who God has been working on her, and He is changing her and her attitude towards everyone around her. Did you know that God can change people? Did you know that the people that you come into contact on a daily basis, they seem abrasive, they seem off, they seem like they are not who they should be for the Lord, but you can rest assured that God can change their heart. Notice this changed woman here. She says in verse 1, Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said unto her, My daughter, shall I not seek rest for thee, that it may be well with thee? And so she is asking a rhetorical question. The question is, an obvious answer is yes. Yes, you should be the one that has a part in this. Yes, you should be the one that gives me some insight on what should I do with my life. And Naomi says, I have something to offer you. And she mentions his name. She reminds us of who she has in mind in verse 2. She said, Boaz, in verse 2. Boaz is one of our kindred. And she says, you have been with him. He is the one that you talked to in the field. And by the way, several weeks have passed since chapter 2. Between the end of chapter 2 and the beginning of chapter 3, we have gone from being in the barley field to now we are at the end of the harvest. Let's say 6 weeks. Let's say 8 weeks. It's been several weeks, and she has been working. She has been in Boaz's fields. And she says, Behold, he is going to be winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. And so she is explaining the process, the social customs of the day, that Boaz, I know where he's going to be. Boaz is going to be winnowing. And what they would do is, as they would bring the harvest in from the fields, they would take it to a place, and sometimes they would find a rock outcropping, sometimes on top of a hill. And at night, the winds would blow, and they would take the barley with different tools, with maybe like some kind of pitchfork, and they would toss the barley in the air, and the winds would blow the chaff away and separate the grain from the chaff. And so they would do this at night because the winds would kick up, and they would also use animals to crush the crop, and it would begin to loosen it up, and then they would toss it in the air. And she says, this is where Boaz will be. I know where he will be tonight. He'll be on the threshing floor. And so her plan for Ruth here is, she says, this is what I want you to do, Ruth. This is what you need to do. You need to wash yourself. You need to anoint yourself with perfumes. And you need to change your clothes. Now, don't get the idea that she's just giving her advice on fashion. She's not just giving her fashion advice. She's not saying, stop shopping at this store, you need to go over here. What she is saying is, she's saying that this is a new day in your life. This is a new chapter in your life. In other words, she's saying it in so many terms. You need to turn the page on this life and start a new day. And so she is saying, fix yourself up a little bit. She's saying, put some perfume on and change your clothes. By the way, we may need to be reminded that Ruth is a widow in mourning. And this would be a symbolic act, if it was anything, at the very least, that her time of mourning and widowhood is over, and she is ready to move on with her life. And so she says, later on in that verse, she says, go down to the floor, but do so in a stealthy way. Do so in a somewhat secretive way. Do not let anyone know that you're there. Go down to the floor after you've done this. And here's the plan. Wait until they have done eating and they've done drinking. And then in verse 4, she says, when he lies down, take note of where he lays down. And what you need to do is go and find that place, and I want you to uncover his feet with the garment that he has covering his legs, because it gets a little cold at night. And I want you to take that and lay at his feet. And he will tell you what you need to do. You might want to take note of that phrase. It's an important phrase. He will take care of the rest. And you're going to see that in this story come about. And then she says in verse 5, Ruth responds, I'm going to do everything you've told me to do. Well, let me make a proposition to you. Since God is actively involved in our lives, did you know that sometimes he will work through others to accomplish his will? Everything that you're seeing in the book of Ruth is God's will is being accomplished through these people. And you know, we might not think that Naomi was one that God would work through. But now God is working through this woman, Naomi. She is a different Naomi than she was in chapter 1 when she said, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, for I am bitter. Naomi is changing because God is healing her broken heart. But I want you to also know this in verses 1 through 5. This plan that Naomi proposes, this plan reflects a growing confidence in God. I don't know about you, but in chapter 2, I began to see Naomi, her countenance seemed to lift when she heard that it was Boaz. When she had heard that Ruth had found grace in someone's eyes. I believe that was God's way of working through Ruth and affecting change on Naomi. And when Naomi, her confidence in God began to grow. But the second thing that her plan reflects is also the will of God. God is actively working in Naomi's life, and this plan is a reflection of what God wants. But notice this, she is also caring for Ruth. She is also caring for Ruth. Did you remember when she came to Bethlehem? It was almost as if Ruth was an invisible person. Naomi was, so self-absorbed, so talking about herself, so worried about her own loss, that Ruth was standing there and it was the invisible little girl. But now Naomi, it's a little different picture now. Now Naomi is concerned with Ruth. I want you to understand that when God begins to affect change in your life, when God begins to change your heart, that it will have an effect on everyone around you. And I'll have to say the opposite, the flip side is true. Until God changes your heart, everyone around you can notice that you are a miserable, rotten individual and in need of Jesus. But here we see the positive side of it. We see that God is working in Naomi's heart. But the second thing I'd like to propose to you is that we should make allowance for God to change people. Do you ever pray for someone and then still seem to harbor the same feelings about them? In other words, if you're going to pray that God will change them, then give them a chance to change. Do you understand what I'm saying? Give them a chance. You know, sometimes we may pray a prayer, but really deep inside, if we're honest about it, we've given up on them. We've given up on them, and we think they're never going to change. And we have we harbor feelings towards them. But understand this, every day is a new day. And how do you know that the person that you're not praying for, God is not changing them as we speak? But also the other thing is we should also make allowance for God to open up doors of opportunity. Ruth is receptive here to Naomi, despite Naomi's spiritual inconsistency. Even though Naomi may not have lived the life that she should have in this young lady's presence. Maybe she had her negativity had rubbed off on Ruth. But still, Ruth listens to Naomi. Still, Ruth is thinking that there is a way, and she is seeing God change Naomi in front of her. And Ruth here, notice this, that Ruth takes the initiative provided by God. You know, sometimes we don't see the opportunities that are in front of us because we're so self-absorbed, or we are so wallowing in self-pity that we don't notice the good and positive things that God is doing in our lives. But here, taking the initiative was part of her faithfulness, but also the preparation that she did was also an act of faithfulness. When Naomi suggested that she change her clothes, that she put on perfume, and that she wash herself, that was in itself an act of faith, because Ruth was preparing for blessing. I want to tell you, if you are going to ask God to bless you, you need to go ahead and prepare for blessing. You know, it's like the old saying goes, if you're going to pray for rain, then go ahead and get out in the fields and start plowing. Because God, don't pray without faithfulness in your prayers. But notice in the second part of this story here, in verses 6 through 15, Ruth is going to make a proposal to Boaz. And I've titled this sermon, A Midnight Proposal. Everything that's happened in the book of Ruth is coming to a head in the next few verses. Everything else has been background, but here is the pivotal point. It is where everything is going to, like a seesaw on that fulcrum there, it is going to be balanced on what is going to happen based upon this proposal. A proposal is made to resolve the problem in Ruth and Naomi's life. And here it is. Look in verse 6. It just simply says that she goes down to the floor. She goes to the threshing floor, just like the plan had entailed. And in verse 7, after Boaz had eaten and drunk, his heart was merry, he lied down behind one of the piles of grain. And then it says that she came softly, she came stealthily, she came quietly, and she uncovered, just like Naomi said, she took that covering off of his legs and she laid down. And it came to pass at midnight. Oh, don't you love this? Isn't it romantic? This is a romantic scene. Can you imagine what it was like? Oh, this is romance, guys. God is interested in your relationships. God is interested in who you marry. Young ladies, pay attention. God is interested in who you choose as a spouse. That's not the only application here. But notice what happens at midnight. At midnight, when it's dark, I can imagine these June breezes blowing across the plains of outside of Bethlehem. Okay, you get giddy just thinking about it, don't you? Can you imagine how giddy, how when Ruth is speaking to Boaz, her heart just seems to skip a beat when she is waiting on his response. And she lays down there and she is waiting, and at midnight he is startled by something. He wakes up. Maybe it's a shiver. Maybe it's a shudder. He realizes that he's getting a little cold, and he wakes up and he says, "Who is that?" And she said, "I am Ruth, thine handmaid. I am Ruth, thine handmaid." And this is the proposal. This is a proposal for marriage. She is asking Boaz, "Will you marry me?" She says, "Spread your skirt, spread your blanket, spread your garment over me." That is the Hebrew way. It's found in the book of Ezekiel. It's found in other parts of the Bible. But it's a proposal for marriage. In fact, you can read on and you'll see that is exactly how Boaz understood it, as a proposal for marriage. Now, let me stop for just a second. You have a foreigner. You have a poor widow foreigner proposing marriage to a male Israelite who is wealthy, who is a man of means, he is a man of substance, he is a man of influence. And I'm going to tell you something. If you don't see how many things could have gone wrong in this plan, then you're not paying close enough attention. Did you notice that part of the plan was sneak in, don't let anyone see you. How in the world is she going to pull this off? And then she is going to lay down. I'm going to tell you, it takes a lot of courage to do what she did. What a daring plan that could go wrong on many different levels. And then you're going to expect him to say yes? On top of that, I don't know, guys, if you remember when you asked your wife to marry you, what you were thinking. What if she says no? Right? But you didn't even have to cross all these other little barriers and cross all these other obstacles that Ruth is having to cross, and all these different just social barriers and all of these different things that can go wrong. And he says, "Who art thou?" Verse 10, he says, oh, what beautiful words. "Blessed be thou of the Lord, my daughter, for thou hast showed more kindness in now than you did at the beginning." He begins with a commendation of her. He begins by praising her. He begins by saying, wow. In my terms, what I'm going to say, you have knocked me off my feet. Boaz is not impressed. And by the way, I think she's very pretty. I think Ruth is probably a very pretty girl. No doubt she's very attractive. But Boaz doesn't say, "Oh, you look so lovely tonight in this under the moonlight." He says, "You look so lovely because you are faithful. You are a faithful girl." And he says, "Blessed be thou of the Lord, for thou hast showed more kindness in the latter than the beginning." And this is how it's demonstrated. You're not following after just anything that walked by. You haven't gone after the younger men. You haven't gone after the rich men. You haven't gone after just anyone. You have pursued me. And that in itself is a demonstration of faithfulness. Now in verse 11, "And now my daughter, don't fear." I don't... This is where I think that her heart was skipping a beat. What is he going to say? He's going to say, "Yeah, but..." And that's exactly what he does. Yes, but I will do to thee all that thou requirest. All the city of my people know you art a virtuous woman. She has a great reputation, and the whole town has been talking about her. The whole town has been bragging about her. Verse 12, "It is true that I am thy near kinsman, but there is one nearer than I." Oh, we can't help but just kind of gasp right here in the story. We can't help but just wonder, something is going to go wrong with this. What a beautiful story. She wants to be with him. He wants to be with her. But then there is some kind of problem that separates them. And our hearts are fluttering right now. We are skipping a beat. We're wondering what's going to happen. And he says this, "Just tarry this, stay here tonight. In the morning, that if that nearer kinsman will perform this, then good, then fine. Let him do it. But if he won't, then I will. If he won't, then I will." What they're talking about here is what's found in the book of Deuteronomy when there was different reasons for redemption. Sometimes someone could have fallen into poverty, and then a near relative would be able to buy them out of poverty, and they would call it redemption. They would redeem them. It really simply means buying back that which was lost. It also occurs when a woman's husband dies, and the brother of the dead husband was allowed to redeem the woman, and so that the seed of the family would go on. And he had an obligation as a near kinsman redeemer to marry his brother's wife. And so it would pass along to brothers and sometimes uncles and sometimes the uncle's sons. It would just go on and on throughout the family until the nearest kinsman would accept this responsibility. That is what they're talking about. And Boaz says, "There is one that is in front of me in line, Ruth. I would love to marry you." And she wants to marry him, but there is someone standing between them that has a legal right to accept or reject this offer of being a redeemer. And he says, lie down until morning. Honey, just lay down until morning. And verse 14 is interesting because it says, and she lay at his feet until the morning. Did you notice what it does not say? It doesn't say she had sweet dreams and she went to sleep. Have you ever been in a situation where you've had a lot of anxiety? Maybe it's the night before Christmas, right? And you just can't sleep. Maybe it's the night before a big decision and you just can't sleep. You know, I can't prove it, but I believe that they laid there all night and they thought about what is happening to us. What Boaz was probably laying there thinking, what am I going to do in the morning? How am I going to get this thing worked out? What are going to be my next steps? I'm going to go tell someone something. I'm going to tell this person something. I'm going to do this. And he's rehearsing it all night long. And she's probably wondering, how is this thing going to turn out? It says she lay at his feet until morning. And she got up before anyone could know each other. In other words, they were the first ones up because I don't think they even went to bed. I don't think they ever fell asleep. I think they were so in love and so anxious about this, and they were so wondering how this situation was going to come to a resolution that they laid there, and probably from 12 to 4, and at 4 o'clock, she got up and he said, don't tell anyone that you were here. And I think he's protecting her reputation when he says that. Verse 15, and he said, bring the veil that you have and hold it. And she held it out. In other words, she took her cape off, she took her cloak off, and she took it and they made it open like a blanket. And they scooped barley in there, and she took it home. And he said to take this home with you. So what I want you to think about as we close this little section is that God's will for our lives should always take priorities over our own desires. Did you notice what Boaz did? He acknowledged, he said, I want to marry you. This is what I want to do. But he restrained himself from doing that. And he's going to put this all in God's hands. He's going to let God work this out. Isn't this an amazing story to think about? What an amazing picture of faithfulness. How many times in our lives have we just jumped the gun and barreled right in there without consulting God and doubting whether God could make something work out? But Boaz has all the confidence in God that anyone could ever want. He just says, you know what? The truth is that I'm not first in line. There's someone else. As much as I want to make this happen, we really need to be patient and let this thing play out. So Boaz, they could have made the wrong choices on the threshing floor. You can tell from looking at the situation how people could have given in to their own desires, and they could have sinned greatly there, but they didn't. Their characters were consistent with how they had been throughout the story, in that it was a conversation about what they wanted for each other, but then they said, you know what, we need to put the brakes on this. This is something that we need to let God handle. Boaz emphasizes her faithful character. Notice in verse 10, he says, thou hast showed more kindness here than you did before. And in other words, it's like this. It was great before. You have shown so much loyalty to Naomi, so much faithfulness to God, but it just keeps getting better and better as you go. And this is the icing on the cake of how you've lived your life. He is praising her character and her faithfulness. But notice this in verse 11, for all the city of my people. It's all the gates of my people, which you're going to see in chapter 4 is the decision-making people, the judges, the council of the town. Everyone in the city knows that she is a virtuous lady. She has a good reputation. She didn't do it by promoting herself. Did you notice that? All we have seen from Ruth is her industriousness, her hard work, her loyalty to Naomi, and her faithfulness to God. She goes to work every day and she winnows and picks up, not winnows, but she gathers and gleans out of the fields and each day, and she takes it back to her mother-in-law and provides her mother-in-law. And in that, people have seen what kind of person that she is. It wasn't that she was a braggart. It wasn't that she was someone who promoted themselves and says, look at me, look at me. No, she does it in a quiet and humble and faithful manner. And let me tell you something, that's the more powerful way for people to notice your character than any other way. Notice this, is that Boaz's actions emphasizes his faithful character. Instead of giving in to his own desires, Boaz leaves this matter to be decided by God. Do you see that? And you can see the faithfulness of Boaz by how he responds to Ruth. He says there in verse 13, if he will perform unto thee the part of a kinsman, then fine. In other words, he's saying that God's will is always going to prevail. And if it's God's will for this other kinsman to have your hand in marriage, then I will accept God's will and step aside, and he can do this. But Boaz knows God is in control. Boaz knows God is in control. He leaves every part of this situation for God to work out. When you put any matter into the hands of God, don't neglect to take seriously the manner in which you conduct yourself. Are you listening to me? Are you hearing me? Don't go to God and ask for God's blessing on something and your heart not be right. Do you hear me? Do you hear me? Amen. Don't go to God and ask for blessing and you haven't gotten your own house clean. It is evident that Boaz's heart is right with God. He trusts God. He is being open with God. Boaz trusted God through his faithful actions and his attitudes. Notice in verses 16 through 18, you're going to see this patience. You know, you can't separate faithfulness and patience. Do you know that? Faithfulness and patience go together. It says in verse 16, when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, who art thou, my daughter? You know what Naomi is asking you? Are you Boaz's wife? She knows who she is. Has your status changed? Am I speaking with the engaged Ruth? What happened? She wants to know what happened. Is she saying, who are you? Am I talking about the bride-to-be? Am I talking to you? And it says, and she told her all that the man had done to her, verse 17. And she said, he gave me this because he says, don't go back home to your mother-in-law empty. This is a way of him showing respect to Naomi. This is a way of saying, I want to care for you, Ruth. And when I care for you, I'm going to take care of your mom. I'm going to take care of your mother-in-law. This is an act of a physical act that reflects how I feel about you and your mother-in-law in my heart. So here, take another day's work of grain home. In verse 18, she said, sit still, my daughter. In other words, just wait. Have some patience, my daughter, and we'll see how this is all going to turn out. I'm going to tell you, it can be one of the most rewarding things in your life to wait on the Lord, but it can also be one of the most difficult things in your life to wait on the Lord. In fact, I'd also say this, that it's easier said than done. And here it is said, and now Ruth has to do it. Naomi says, sit still, but the challenge is going to be with Ruth. Wow, I don't want to wait. I want to know now. I want to know the answer now. It says, she says this about Boaz. He won't rest until he has gotten to the bottom of this. Oh, what a testament again of the man Boaz, that he is a man that's going to see things through. Although we live in a world that demands instant results and gratification, you cannot separate faithfulness and patience. We live in a fast food world. We live in a microwave world. We live in a I want results and I want it now kind of world. But you know what? God's plan doesn't always work like we want it to. And we have to see it out. We have to see it through and see how it plays out. The blessings in our lives, like this grain that she gave as a blessing, they are in some kind of a way, and you can transfer this over to your life as a blessing. The blessings that you have in your life are in some kind of way an earnest payment or a down payment for things that God is going to give you in the days to come. Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever thought about all the things that God has in store for you? But the little things in life, the little blessings in life now, just like this grain that Boaz gave her to take home, is just a little preview of what's in store for all of us. This is where the rubber meets the road, guys. We, just like she's trusting, we trust Jesus. We trust Jesus, who did not rest until every aspect of our salvation was accomplished. Did you see what she said about Boaz? He will not, this Redeemer will not stop until he gets to the bottom of it. I want you to know that we trust Jesus because he has gotten to the bottom of it. He has resolved all the problems of our salvation. So, in the big picture here in chapter 3, God was in control at midnight in Bethlehem. Are you hearing me? God was in control at midnight. When Ruth asked Boaz to spread that garment over her, God was looking down the hallways of time. Now listen to me. I haven't said it until today. God was looking, he was telescoping into the future to another night in Bethlehem. God was in control at midnight. And did you see what Boaz said? He said, I will. I will. And so what's the big deal? Why is this important? Let me tell you why it's important. It's the reason that Ruth is in our Bible. It is the reason that God inspired the writer of Ruth to put his pen to the scroll and write down the story. The reason it's in the Bible is about 1,200 years later, because of Boaz and Ruth coming together, there would be a little baby boy born in Bethlehem. His name is Obed, and he is David's grandpa. David's grandpa. You say, so what? Well, there'll be another little baby born in Bethlehem 1,200 years later, and his great-great-great-great-great-great-grandpa was David. And you add about two more greats or one more great, it was Obed. One more great, it was Boaz. God knew what he was doing when he was working in the lives of Boaz and Ruth. Because this Redeemer would only be the foreshadowing of the Redeemer. When the original audience was reading this story, they knew what they were reading. Someone said, did you hear what was just written? They wrote a story about David's grandparents. They wrote a story and about how his great-grandpa and grandma met. And so when people would be reading this, they would be reading all along, and they would come to this part here, and they would go, how do they get together? How does God work this out? And so you're seeing that the Redeemer would come through the line of David and through the line of Ruth and Boaz, and Jesus would be born in Bethlehem. I want to leave it with you like this. If you've not trusted in the Redeemer, if you've not trusted in Jesus as your Redeemer, as your Savior, as your the friend that sticks closer to a brother, now is the day. I'm going to tell you, this all doesn't come on by accident. There is nothing left to chance in this story. God is in full control. Let me tell you something. He's in full control of your life every day. You're not sitting here by accident. Remember what Jesus said. He said, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Rest is being sought in chapter 3. And this Boaz is not going to rest until he gets to the bottom of it. And Jesus didn't rest until he accomplished everything in salvation. If our musicians would come at this time, we'll prepare for